All right, I just wanted to give you some guidance here on the assignment of the effect of oxygen on cells. So this has to do with cell growth, right? Our question here, how does oxygen affect cell growth? Got some background information, and then our procedure. We're going to make a graph from this data, and this data is a bit confusing. So the goal of this is to walk you through how to set up this graph, okay? So first up, a little background here. Just what we're dealing with. You can read through this on your own, but we are dealing with a bacteria called Aerobacter aerogenes. It's what we call a facultative anaerobe, which means that it can do both aerobic and anaerobic respiration. It's pretty cool. So this setup here, they had two different series, Series A and Series B. What they did with Series A is they had all these test tubes and they sealed them off so they did not get any air in them. And for each tube, they were changing the concentration of glucose in that tube. Okay. And then what we were measuring was the number of bacteria at maximum growth, millions per milliliter. So this means we're looking at test tube 1A with a concentration of 18 milligrams of glucose. There were 50 million bacteria growing in there. All right, all the way up, if we look at test tube 5A, we have 162 milligrams of glucose. We have 250 million bacteria. Series B here are test tubes with air, so they were getting some airflow, some oxygen into those tubes. These, as you can see, the numbers are quite a bit higher, and at some point we plateau over here. So we kind of reach our maximum growth at 1,300 million bacteria. Okay. So let me show you how to set up this graph. So what you need is this document. You're also going to need a blank Google Sheets. Okay, so I've got my blank Google Sheets here and this document. The first thing I want to grab is my concentration of glucose. This is my independent variable. It's what I'm changing. So I'm just going to highlight all this. I'm going to copy, go to my spreadsheet, click anywhere, paste. Okay, for some reason, kicks those numbers out, that's fine. All right, I need to come back into my document. Okay, and now I want to grab this first series, the test tubes without air. I'm going to highlight all of that, copy, and paste it into here. I want to make sure all my numbers line up. And then I'm going to grab that last group, test tubes with air, highlight, copy, and paste. Okay. My data table should be set to go here, so I'm going to highlight all of this, insert, chart, and it gives me something pretty good. It's a line graph, and I want a line graph because I want to look at how glucose concentration changes number of bacteria produced. All right, so I'm looking at a change of something. But there are a couple things that I need to make sure I've got on my graph and things I might need to add. Okay, I want to make sure my lines are labeled correctly. Okay, so the blue one lines without air, red ones lines with air. Okay, those look pretty good for all my glucose concentrations here. Those are labeled correctly. I have an x-axis label, concentration of glucose. I've got my units, milligrams per milliliter. I don't have a y-axis label, so I need to add that. So I'm going to go over here to this editor, and if you don't see this, you can always get there by clicking on the chart and saying edit chart. But I'm going to select customize. I'm going to go to chart and axis title. Hit this drop down menu, make sure I select the vertical axis title. What do I put on there? Well, I can just get that right from the table. I'm going to go back in here. This is what I need on that x-axis. So I'm going to highlight all of this, copy, and I can just paste it right into here. Okay, pretty good. So I got both axis titles, and now my last thing, I don't really like this title. This title doesn't tell me what's going on in this graph. I'm going to change this. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to select chart title, get rid of all this, and I want something that's really going to describe what's going on in this graph. Okay. So maybe I want to say, let's go with amount. If I can spell. Amount of bacteria produced with air and without air at varying glucose levels. Okay, I know, boring title, but it's descriptive. I'm explaining both variables, and I think it does a good job at telling you what's on my graph. Now, if I look over here, I don't really see the full label on this, so I'm just going to make this graph a little bigger. There we go, until I've got everything there. My graph's good. I'm going to make sure it's got the blue box around it. I'm going to Control C, come back into my document, paste it right below here, Control V. There we go. Looks pretty nice. Looks pretty nice. Then you can go on to the questions here. This one's talking about differences. This one's going to ask you to do a little math. Okay. I want to know how many bacteria were produced per milligram of glucose. Talking about test tubes 4A and 4B. Okay. This tells me number of bacteria. This tells me concentration of glucose. And I want to get to bacteria per milligram of glucose. So I'll do some math. I think you can figure that one out. Number 3, develop a hypothesis for how oxygen affects growth. Okay, can you explain why there are more bacteria in B than A? And then a couple of other questions down here that are going to ask you to think a little bit. All right, so I think y'all will be good. Go ahead and give this a shot. We can talk about this on Friday a bit as well.